Now, we know the Indiana Fever's front office has been an absolute dumpster fire. Guys. We all know that. They look like they are lost. They have no clue what to do, where to turn, what's going on. President of basketball operations and business operations for the Indiana Fever, Kelly Kroskoff, took to the Query & Company podcast. Shout out to them. And she went in on how they're going to try to reinsert Caitlin Clark and get her back acclimated.
Front office executive from the Indiana Fever, Kelly Kroskoff, recently appeared on a podcast and said something that has fans seriously fired up. She spoke about the timeline for bringing Caitlin Clark back into the lineup after her injury and rebuilding team chemistry. But the way she framed it raised eyebrows. It sounded less like the team adjusting to Clark and more like Clark needing to adjust to them.
Kroskoff, come to the front. I need to hear from you. What is going on with the decision making? What is the plan for Caitlin Clark? Because it looks like it's you guys' idea to try to build a team to win without her rather than getting supplemental pieces.
She mentioned that Clark makes things easier for her teammates, but also said it would still take time for everything to click. When you hear a front office talk about reintegrating the best player in women's basketball as if she's the one who needs to adapt to the team, instead of the team adapting to her, it really makes you question their entire approach to building this roster. Kelly Kroskoff, you've got some explaining to do.
A player like Caitlin Clark, that is, I don't need to tell anybody about what Caitlin Clark is, right? We know that.
Yep.
But even though she's practicing with her teammates, even though she's around it, even though she's she's pretty ubiquitous within the field house when you go to different events there. Mm-hmm. But that's different than being in games. How long does it realistically take over the course of a season when you are reinserting something that is that big a straw mixing the drink to an extent for everybody to get that cohesiveness on the floor together back once again?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've been around it a long time. You know it does take a minute. But the thing about Caitlin that you know, we've had a lot of great players here. She makes it so easy for everybody else because of her IQ, because of her passing ability, the way she sees the floor. I mean,
okay, because of her passing ability and because of her IQ, but Stephanie White wants the girl playing.
Wait, let's break down what Kroskoff said on the podcast, because this feels like one of those moments where the Fever unintentionally revealed how they truly view building around Caitlin Clark. And honestly, it's not reassuring. When you really listen to her comments and compare them to what should have been said, there's a clear disconnect.
You're saying doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter. Like what are y'all doing over there?
I mean, she really creates a lot of ease on the offensive end, and just, you know, it's not that hard to play. You know, you got to find the right players that kind of understand that, but it still does take time. You know, there were moments last year when we were down the stretch where we were like, good Lord, imagine if we had, you know, Caitlin back and healthy. And then we were losing players along the way, but thinking about the opportunities ahead of us and knowing that, okay, if we get everybody healthy again, you know, we lost Sophie partway through. I mean, she was shooting over 40% from the three, really helping us spread the floor. So there was a lot of optimism coming into this year, and knowing that when they get back out on the floor together, because we started seeing glimpses of it, when everybody's healthy and back on the court together, it's, you know, we're hopeful it's going to take us along.
The host asked a simple and fair question. When a player like Caitlin Clark misses time due to injury and then returns, how long does it take for the team to regain its rhythm? That's a reasonable thing to ask. Clark was out with a knee issue, the team had to adjust without her, and now she's coming back. Of course there will be a transition period, but Kroskoff's response is where things get interesting. She repeatedly used the idea of reinserting Clark into the lineup. That wording is important. It suggests that Clark is being added back into an already established system, as if the team's identity exists separately from her, and now they need to carefully fit her back in. That's the wrong way to look at it. Caitlin Clark isn't just another piece. She is the system. Everything this team does offensively should revolve around her strengths. You don't plug her into something that already exists. You build everything around her and let everyone else adjust accordingly. But based on Kroskoff's comments, that's not how the front office sees it. She did acknowledge that chemistry takes time and praised Clark's IQ, vision, and passing. Rightfully so. Clark is one of the best playmakers in the game. She draws defenders and creates easy opportunities for her teammates, whether that's open threes or easy looks at the rim. But here's where things don't add up. If Clark's biggest strength is her ability to create for others, why is she being used off the ball at times? Why run offensive sets where she isn't the primary decision maker? If she's your best facilitator, the ball should be in her hands as much as possible. You can't highlight her playmaking and then design a system that limits it. That's a contradiction between coaching strategy and roster philosophy. Kroskoff also said that playing with Clark isn't complicated. You just need the right players who understand how to play alongside her. That sounds logical, but it leads to a major question. If it's that simple, why did the Fever load up on guards this offseason? They currently have 8 guards heading into training camp. 8, alongside just 3 forwards and 1 center. That's not a balanced roster, and it certainly doesn't look like one built around a generational point guard who thrives with spacing and interior support. According to Kroskoff, the team prioritized adding guards, including drafting Raven Johnson at number 10, a defensive-minded player who can serve as a backup and is on a cost-controlled deal. That explanation might make sense in isolation, but in the bigger picture, it doesn't solve the team's biggest issues. They already have multiple capable guards. Caitlin Clark, Ty Harris, Kelsey Mitchell, Lexi Hull. What they don't have is size, length, and depth in the frontcourt. There's very little behind Aaliyah Boston, and that's a serious problem. Instead of addressing that, they added yet another guard. It feels like the front office is planning long-term depth at one position while ignoring immediate needs. If the goal is to compete for a title while Clark is in her prime, this approach doesn't line up with that timeline. Kroskoff also brought up developmental roster spots, similar to two-way contracts where younger players can be kept without making the main roster. While that's useful, it also suggests they're drafting players who aren't ready to contribute right away, which is questionable for a team. Trying to win now, one of those spots is expected to go to an undersized point guard taken in the 3rd round. Instead of using that pick to strengthen the frontcourt, they once again lean toward adding another guard. That pattern is hard to ignore. Going back to the earlier comments, Kroskoff talked about moments late last season where the team struggled with injuries and imagined how different things could have been with a healthy Clark. She expressed optimism about what the team could do once everyone is back. That optimism is understandable, but the underlying mindset still seems off. Everything is framed around fitting Clark into the team, rather than building the team around Clark. And that distinction matters more than it might seem. It affects every decision, from drafting to free agency to lineup construction. If you believe Clark needs to adapt, you build within your existing system. But if you recognize that she is the system, you build differently. You surround her with shooters to stretch the floor, bigs who can screen and finish, and defenders who can cover weaknesses. Right now, the Fever's roster suggests they're not fully embracing that second approach. They've stacked the backcourt, added more guards, and continue to talk about adding even more. Meanwhile, the frontcourt remains thin, with Boston as the only true center. That imbalance becomes even more glaring when you look at other teams. The New York Liberty, for example, have size across the board. The Fever, on the other hand, are preparing to compete with a roster full of smaller guards. That's a tough matchup in any scenario. What makes this more frustrating for fans is that Kroskoff doesn't seem to fully grasp the concern. She acknowledged the criticism of the backcourt, but suggested adding yet another veteran guard as a solution, which only deepens the imbalance. She also pointed to last season as proof they can manage adversity. But that version of success involved Clark playing through injury and the team barely holding things together. That's not a sustainable model. It's a warning sign. Overall, the language used throughout the interview reveals a bigger issue. There's talk of chemistry, adjustment, and reintegration, but very little emphasis on building a system tailored to Clark's strengths. And that's why fans are frustrated. It's not just about one decision, it's about a pattern that suggests a misunderstanding of how to construct a championship team around a once-in-a-generation player. At the end of the day, Kroskoff's comments unintentionally highlighted that disconnect. The organization appears to believe Clark needs to fit into their vision, rather than shaping the entire roster around her. And if that mindset doesn't change, it could cost them valuable opportunities to compete while she's at her peak. The way they talk about reintegrating Caitlin Clark and needing time for things to click as if she's the one adjusting says a lot. It explains why the roster is so guard-heavy and lacking inside presence. They're trying to fit a superstar into a system when the system should be built around her from the ground up. Built around her from the ground up.